As I mentioned at the end of the last video, we are going to learn about lots of different structural connections in this video. It wasn't very long ago that the structural connections for Revit were an add-in package instead of being included with Revit. It's just been recent that it's actually become part of the package. This is the fun part, and that's adding all the structural connections. It can be really interesting, and again, it can be a little bit challenging, but you do have a couple of options. One, you can create your own, or you can use the ones that come with Revit, or you can use a combination. So let's get started. Before we start our connections, if you recall, the angle we picked was 8 by 8 by 1/8. And when I go to my south elevation, you can see my angles are actually sticking out of my wall. So I want to modify them. So I'm going to pick one of them, and I'm going to do edit type, and I'm going to do duplicate. And I'm going to make it a 3 by 3 by 3/4. Say okay. Change this to 3. Change that to 3. And change this to 3/4. And say okay. And now you see that it's no longer showing up. So if I select the other two, and I change those to my 3 by 3, I should be good. Again, I want to go look at it in my 3D view. And I want to go back and look at it in my section. And everything is good. So now we are ready to continue with our connections. To get to the connections, we want to go to structure, and you'll see right here you have connection. If you just go to this pull down, all it does is expand that. So where we want to go is to the little arrow, and when you do, it's going to do some loading. Over here on the right, you're going to see all of the connections that are available. Keep in mind that these connections can be very complicated, and they're also parametric, which means they're going to add a lot to your Revit drawing, and they can potentially slow your drawing down. So just kind of keep that in mind. What I typically do is I select all of them by holding down my shift key and do add, and it puts them over in this location, and then I can just say okay, and now they are all loaded. If I go to connection, they are all loaded into my drawing. You don't have to do that, but I don't like to go back and forth and have to look for specific connections. So we're going to first start with our beam to column connection. So what I want to do first is I want to pick each piece, and I can do that by holding down my control key, and then I can get to my connections either from my structure or my steel menu. So if I click on connection, you're going to see it places a connection here. You're going to notice if I scroll around here that it has a little connection here in the middle. That is showing the connection. Then the next thing you'll notice, it has 2 dots. It has dot number 2, and then it has one that is just the solid bigger dot, and that is representing number 1. The number 1 is your primary, and number 2 is the secondary. To toggle between the two, you just click on the dot. That way you can determine which one is primary and which one is secondary. The next thing you're going to notice is over here it just says generic connection. So the next thing is deciding which type of connection that we want. And again, we loaded everything into our project. What I want to use is the knee frame bolted with a haunch. Basically, if you look at the picture, you have a beam and a column that has now added a piece of metal underneath it to help carry the loads of both of those pieces. So I'm going to select my knee frame bolted haunch, And you'll see down here it gave me a little error that said highlighted geometry no longer determines as a plane. That is fine, we can ignore that warning. But you're like, oh no, nothing showed up. If we come down here and we make sure we're on fine, then you can actually see our connection. You can see the haunch, which is this piece down here. You can see the plates that are bolted in here, and you can see all of the detail. So that worked out very nicely. One thing that is very interesting about these connections is they are parametric, meaning that they realize the connections of the parts and pieces and they adjust according to fit to that. So if we had a wider flange here and a wider flange on this particular beam, it would adjust accordingly, and it would adjust to the number of bolts, etc. So it's very knowledgeable in how it comes into play. We have some different ways that we can customize these connections. One of those is when you have that connection selected, you'll notice up here you have a customize and you have a break. If we click on customize, it's going to let you name the new connection. I'm just going to hit cancel, and what that's going to allow you to do is here under the still tab, you can go in and modify this particular element by adding some plates, some welds, whatever you want to use off of this menu. So that is one way to customize. The other option is the break over here. What this does is it breaks this connection into individual pieces so that you can modify parts of it. So if I click on break, now you'll see that I can come in here and I can select individual bolts and I can make changes there. I could change this from one continuous piece to be plates. So there's lots of different ways that you can go about customizing your particular pieces. So I'm going to undo that. With those two types of modifications, you would want to only use those if you're making major modifications. The nice thing about the Revit connections, again, as with most everything we've done, you can go into edit type. Again, this is very similar to other families. We can zoom in here and look at this, and we can come in here and modify the parameters. If we click on edit, it's going to take us in and show us all of the parts and pieces of this connection. So I want to go through these and kind of just show you an example of the sophistication within this family. If I do this side, basically this haunch is going to be down here. If I change it to other side, you see it moves it up there. Again, that's not a practical thing to do. I have profile and I have plates. Again, this was one piece and now it has turned into plates. So I'm going to turn that back to profile. This one is the length from the inner end plate face, and again, if I look on here, I can change that, and I'm going to change it pretty drastically so you can see the difference. And you'll see it change the length from here to here. And then the height from the rafter bottom, I'm going to change that again to be pretty drastic. I'm going to change it to 3 feet, and you'll see it dropped that down. The corner chamfer finish, if I rotate these around, it has a chamfer here. You can barely see it. If I change that to say 3 inches, you'll be able to see where the chamfer changes there. If I change the other chamfer to 3 inches, now you can see that it did a chamfer up in this corner here. Currently, the way this made this, it was the same section as the rafter. So if I want that to be different, I can click on that and then it will let me pick a different material. So again, you have some flexibility there. If you watch the picture here and I click on additional plate, you see it added an additional plate onto here. If I click on additional rafter, you'll see it added an extension back here in the back. So I can do different things there. In plate, again, it gave me some different parameters that I can change that in plate. The cap plate, which is on top, again, I have some different parameters. I can make it a full, I can make it a half, different things. So I have some adjustments there. Bolts and welds. Again, I can change what kind of bolts that I want to use. I can change my grouping. Standard welds. Again, it's going to show where there are standard welds. And again, I can go in and change the size of those welds as I want to. I can add additional welds. If I feel like I need some additional welds on here, I can do that. Reinforcing, I can add some additional reinforcing. You'll see that here is behind the bolts themselves. Instead of going directly into the flange, there's another little plate in there. The bolts and holes, again, I can determine how I want them to be, and I can do offsets. And then I can always add stiffeners in. Sometimes we feel like we need to add a stiffener in between the flanges to give that beam just a little more stability where we're adding on to it. So we have all kinds of settings there. So you see the major connections that Revit comes with, you still have lots of ways that you can modify them. I'm going to hit cancel and get back out of this. Hit cancel again. So now that we have done one connection, I would like for you to go through the remainder up here at the top and add that same connection to each one of yours. In the next video, we are going to look at choosing the right connection. How do we know what is the right connection? So that will be in the next video.